Kaya. Thank you for taking the time to watch our presentation titled Grounding Indigenous Science in a Foundational Unit, a Pandemic Experience. My name is Reva Ramia, and I'm the Academic Language and Literacy Skill Development Coordinator for the Faculty of Science and Engineering, Curtin University. I'd like to introduce my co-authors, Brenda Roll, Tracy Kickett, Alison Bly, Vanessa Karuna, Anthony Kickett, and Fred Yeso. We are part of the development and teaching team for this unit of study that explores the integration of Indigenous science in STEM. In this presentation, we will discuss lessons learned with respect to curriculum development and the delivery of the unit during the lockdown period. We will start with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the Noongar Whadjuk people as the traditional owners of country on which Curtin's Bentley campus sits. We wish to acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea, and community, and we pay our respects to them and their culture, and to elders past, present, and future. This unit of study is a response to the elevated rap and has been created collaboratively by the Centre for Aboriginal Studies and the Faculty of Science and Engineering. The teaching of this unit has created the opportunity for science students at university to explore an alternate epistemic and ontological foundation of science, one that has largely been silenced in mainstream science education. To ensure authenticity and the foregrounding of Indigenous worldviews, the content of the unit was written by Tracy Kickett. Let us now hear from Tracy.
Hiya. Hello everyone. My name is Tracy Kickett and I'm speaking to you from a part of Balladong country in York. I was asked to share where I was coming from when I wrote the content for the CAS and Science unit. Of course, I had the original outline of the unit to consider and follow. I wanted to come from an Aboriginal person's perspective, and this was based on my Aboriginal lived experience as a child and adult, and I also wanted to incorporate the cultural laws that were instilled in me from a young age, such as respect, kinship, creation laws, to name a few. Also, I wanted to take from my professional working experience within remote, rural and metropolitan Aboriginal communities, also my lived experience in remote, rural and metropolitan communities. I truly wanted a natural flow throughout the course to show what was meant by everything within Aboriginal culture being all interconnected and also intraconnected for Aboriginal people. I wanted to honour the past experience of Aboriginal people and keep in line with the 2019's NAIDOC theme, which was Voice Treaty Truth, especially zooming in on the truth-telling, highlighting how Aboriginal people were scientists in their own right when it came to our culture. Also, I wanted to highlight the strength and resilience of our people living through and surviving past government policies and past atrocities within Australia. I enjoyed every moment of completing the research and writing for this unit, and I thank the Centre for Aboriginal Studies and the School of Science for allowing me to share this.
Vanessa Karuna explains the need for a different narrative.
We're really confronting people's ideas about Aboriginal Australia in how the narrative has been portrayed historically from when colonisation happened in this country, and how some of the scientists have actually documented our people as inferior and savage and uncivilised people. The challenge, I guess, for teaching the unit is deconstructing some of those thought patterns that have managed to progress throughout the establishment of Australia as we know it today, and actually bring in a new narrative of Aboriginal understandings of showing the true culture which existed, which was far from those types of terms, in that Aboriginal people were very knowledgeable about land, very knowledgeable about surviving in some of the harshest times throughout the years. If we look at the Holocene and how Aboriginal people were able to manage in those cold conditions, and when there was a scarcity on the landscape, I think it's quite empowering to be able to share those stories with the kids and show through archaeological evidence, scientific evidence, that Aboriginal people did survive.
Whilst foregrounding Indigenous worldviews is front and centre to the unit also had other learning outcomes to fulfill, as it is a foundational unit in the Bachelor of Science program. Let us now hear from Brenda Roll, the unit coordinator.
This unit has been planned for 3 years as part of the restructure of the Bachelor of Science. It replaced a science communications unit that covered the science threshold learning outcomes related to understanding and communicating science. The unit also serves as the designated unit to teach academic integrity skills. The final impetus to commence the unit was Curtin's new elevated RAP plan. It was still a major undertaking, though, incorporating it into all of our science courses. The content was written from an Indigenous science perspective, and the unit is co-delivered with CAS staff to forefront Indigenous voices. We wanted Aboriginal people to tell their story and for our students to hear it from the owners of the knowledge, knowing that many of our students have never met an Aboriginal person before, let alone talked to one. Whilst the unit takes the perspective of the Noongar people as we are on their land, students can still relate the knowledge to their own context and discipline for research and assessment purposes. The unit is also delivered at 3 international campuses. However, this story has parallels in many countries around the world that have been colonised. As science is made up of diverse disciplines ranging from environmental science to computing, a significant challenge has been engaging first-year students to apply the knowledge to their distinct disciplines. Another challenge is convincing discipline specialists of the relevance of the content to the students' learning as a future graduate attribute. Further, remote teaching delivery during the pandemic shutdown period was another complication, as transferring to online teaching required everyone to upskill and assessment deadlines had to be adapted. The online delivery did not really lend itself to the yarning technique that we were using, as there are topics such as white privilege and race science being addressed, and not having access to facial cues added to the complexities of teaching this unit.
An important aspect to consider is how to approach the subject with students. Fred Yeso explains.
The session that we did, we made sure that we explained to them, but we're not here to talk about ideology. I'm not here to talk about Indigenous ways of working. These are the ways you need to do for the rest of your life. It's about providing that Indigenous perspective to science, which they have to be aware of, so that they can do whatever they want with that information. Yeah. And I'm not, as I say to the students, we're not here to convert you to a way of living or being, we're just saying this is the way that we've learned and this is the way we live, which is different to you guys, and it's good to understand those perspectives so that when you're working in this space with Aboriginal people, that you understand that where they're coming from.
Introducing Indigenous ways of knowing science to students is not as straightforward, as the worldview is foreign to students who have come from a Eurocentric education system. Anthony speaks of how he delivers some of these concepts.
Welcome to Country, for example, as a cultural protocol, and bringing that into contemporary sort of situations where, when you welcome someone into your home, there is a process. They come through the front door generally, and you welcome them through. They're a guest, they're a visitor that you actually want there, and you treat them accordingly. And the expectation is they won't wander through your house, and looking around and going through your cupboards. Well, that's similarly, we don't want people wandering through our country and looking at places that are important to us and then suddenly trespassing and doing something illegal or unsafe.
To conclude this presentation, let us listen to Alison Bly, who explains the connection between science and cultural awareness and the interaction of science and society.
One of the important things about this unit is we're not just looking at cultural awareness, we go beyond a normal cultural awareness unit to really integrate science, STEM, and the history of science into it. Science has never operated in isolation from society, it can't. So whenever we're talking about the history of science, scientific achievements, who scientists are, that's always embedded in a social context. And how science has been applied is always affected by the social context, by the social norms or the political norms of the time. So one of the things we try to do in this unit is actually give students an understanding of how science has interacted with social and cultural norms in the past. With respect to Australian history, it's a particular issue that many of the laws that have impacted Indigenous people, impacted Aboriginal communities, were actually deliberately and directly based in eugenics. And of course, eugenics is an ideology first and foremost, but it's an ideology that was born of and embedded in Western science. So we take students through how science and social attitudes to race evolved together in the 18th, 19th and early 20th centuries, and how that was then specifically implemented for a political gain, and how that implementation has had long-term knock-on effects on Aboriginal communities and the Indigenous peoples of our continent. What I think that helps students do is actually link the cultural awareness component to an understanding of the context of their discipline. Because many of the issues we talk about historically with science, like the impact of having just one perspective in science with regards to race or gender, disability and so on, how that can actually still impact on people today is something that's very relevant. It's something we see in the press currently. So giving students that historical context for how science fits in society and how that's linked to the cultural material they're learning really helps contextualize everything in the unit and link it back to their own scientific careers. And then towards the end of the unit, we encourage them to actually think about how many of the issues that we've talked about during semester and how the concepts around social biases in science, scientific implemented within society, will actually turn up in their careers. Because if they're going on to careers as scientists, whether it's computer engineers, whether it's teachers, environmental scientists, mining engineers, whatever, those social biases are going to turn up in their careers because all of us as scientists experience them. So we consider this much more than just a first year, okay, here's your cultural awareness experience. We consider this a foundation to help students think about where they sit within science and where their science sits within society.